Welcome to Watchtower History. If we look at the supremacy cover, we can see some of the artwork depicting these ideas. In the supremacy booklet, Rutherford says, "It will be conceded that those who opposed Jesus were fighting against God. It might well be to give heed to the class of men who did oppose Jesus when he was on earth. And what was the ultimate result? The Pharisees, the Jews, and doctors of the law composed the clergy amongst the Jews, and they were the ones who led all opposition against him. True to the prophecy which God had declared by Ezekiel and others, a terrible trouble came upon Jerusalem a few years thereafter. All who opposed the Lord Jesus perished." The Lord then plainly says that what happened to Jerusalem foreshadowed and foretold a like condition that came upon Christendom. It's freely admitted that the clergy of Christendom form a part of the world. None of them are being persecuted or imprisoned because of following their profession, and indeed they should not be. It is their privilege to preach as they desire. The question is, who are the witnesses of Jehovah and who are obeying the commandments of God?
Now, before you go where you're going to go with that, let's look at all that. Once again, who are being persecuted? Okay, let's instigate so we're persecuted. I'm the one in prison, so you're working for me again. Nobody else is preaching matters because the question is, who are the witnesses of Jehovah? Well, wait, I changed the name to Jehovah's Witnesses, so that makes it very easy, and obeying the commandments of God that are set forth by the faithful and discreet slave. 175 hours a month is reasonable. 150 hours is reasonable for the average. Now go where you are going to go with this now.
All right. And so here again, we have these anti-Semitic statements. He rejected the Jews then, he rejects the Jews now. In Rutherford's book, Escape to the Kingdom, and notice it says flee to the mountains down there at the bottom. Boy, they like their death and destruction cart work here in that period. He says, "It may be said that the Catholic organization, headed by its mighty pontiff, the multitudinous divisions of the Protestant organizations, headed by their wise, eloquent clergy, and the Jews led by their philosophical rabbis," again, against the Jews. This is the point of what we're trying to make here. "This united religious multitude, supported by the professional politicians and financial giants," again, linking the Jews in with the money bags, "will present such an inspiring spectacle before the throne of God that even he will hear and grant their petitions that they've been relieved of their burdens and given more and more comfort." And so if you look
now, let me ask you a question.
If you look in the image here, you can see the bags of money down there as well. Yeah, go ahead.
And it has to do with the back cover picture, which would be the one on the left. What is your take on that guy with his hands reached in the air?
He's one who's seeking help.
Yes. Now, here's what Jehovah's Witnesses are saying, Rutherford and all them are saying. He's looking for help. He realized what he did, but they're trying to show it's too late. We're going to kill you anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, he doesn't know. They even drew it right. I mean, you can tell by the guy's like, wait, I didn't know. Oh, sorry. Just like the days of Noah, we're slamming the door on you, but this one's second death.
All right. And now in the book again, I'm going to read another statement from the book. He says, "The scriptures declare that all men are by nature unrighteous and that righteousness can be obtained only by faith in obedience to Jehovah." And this is to add to what you're saying. "In Christ Jesus and his shed blood as the redemptive price of man, prayer to Jehovah must be asked in the name of Christ Jesus because God has thus commanded it. All Jewish rabbis entirely reject Jesus Christ as Redeemer of man." Again, the Jews, you're not going to make it. And remember, at this time, they're already starting to see some of what the Nazis are doing. And so basically, they're going to go from Hitler's ovens to God's ovens. You can see the fire and the destruction here in the picture here. All modernist clergymen do likewise reject him. Pretty much he's saying, everyone, all y'all who don't agree with me, you're all eternally lost. including those who were part of us and left, right?
Yep.
And so he says down here, all modernist clergymen do likewise reject him and his precious blood, and the entire combination heretofore mentioned rejects Jehovah God's provision through Christ and his kingdom to bless all the families of the earth with peace and prosperity, and on the contrary, have given their allegiance to the League of Nations, which is a product of the devil. So again, he's bringing in his anti-Semitism, the League of Nations, his attacks on the clergy, on the Catholics, on all those who reject him, and he's really just back to this vicious attacking. And remember, a lot of these booklets were his radio programs or the records that they were playing. And so
Which
this is what people, this is what people were hearing on the radio. It was pretty much hate speech. In Rutherford's warning book, he says,
we have now come to the end of the world, and it's God's command that a warning shall be given from his word of the great and final disaster that soon shall befall the world. And the things that came to pass among Israel he uses as striking examples to warn the people. Because Israel, under the leadership of her clergy, turned away from God's commandments and turned to religious practices, Jesus not only told them that they were of the devil, but he warned Jerusalem in these words, O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, thou that killest the prophets and stonest them that were sent unto thee, how often would I have gathered thy children together, even as a hen gathereth her chickens under her wings, and ye would not. Behold, therefore your house is left unto you desolate. A few years thereafter, Jerusalem was completely destroyed, and the Jews never again shall control that city.
This, again, is important later. These same exact statements come up again later, so we'll get to that in a little bit.
So the Jews never, ever, ever shall control Israel, the land of Israel and Jerusalem. That's quite a statement.
Considering what we know, yeah.
Which
another false prophecy.
I was just going to say, which show where his ideas really end up when it's all said and done.
Yeah, and so he's making a false prophecy that they're never going to be in their homeland, and then when they were in their homeland, right? We'll get into that a little bit more.
But
they had to backtrack on that. Yeah.
I reject you again.
Well, Rutherford did have the cure. In Rutherford's booklet, Cure, he says, the Jews' religion brought about the foul crucifixion of Jesus Christ, the murder of Stephen, and widespread and malicious persecution of numerous Christians, the disciples of Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ denounced the practice of Jews' religion as a fraud and the practicers of hypocrites. It was the practice of the Jews' religion that caused the complete destruction of Jerusalem and the entire nation. And that nation has never been and never will be permitted to again exist as a nation. So again, this false prophecy.
Now, I find it funny on the cover. Do we need more religion? He's creating more religion while he's against everything, while he's making a false prophecy in the book. Do we need more religion?
And saying at the same time, religion is a snare and a racket.
Yeah.
Yeah.
While everything he's saying does not come to be.
In his book, Enemies, he says, today Protestantism is dead so far as protest against the practitioners of Catholicism is concerned. And the Protestant clergy, together with the rabbis of the Jewish religious organization, again, grouping in the Jews with his hatred towards others, right? They act in harmony therewith. All such practice religion of which the devil is the author. We don't practice religion because the devil is the author of a religion. That's why religion is a snare and a racket, right? He says, today, so-called Protestants and the Yiddish clergy openly cooperate and play into the hands of the Roman Catholic hierarchy. Remember, at this time, he's blaming the Catholics for what's going on in Germany, right? And he's somehow saying the Jews are involved in that. They play into the hands of the Roman Catholic hierarchy like foolish simpletons, and thereby aid the hierarchy to carry on her commercial, religious traffic. Again, commercial Jew, and increase her revenue. Commercial religion is the stock in trade of all such merchants. The hierarchy takes the lead, and the simpletons follow. The hierarchy is now taking lead in compulsory flag saluting and in building images or monuments, such as what is now widely advertised to be built at Washington. And the clergy of the so-called Protestant and Yiddish organizations fall in line and do what they're told. And when the sackbut sounds, they fall down and worship. Poor simpletons. And so again, he's linking in the Jews into the Anglo-American Empire, League of Nations. He's doing it again here.
And he removed any question about Jew as a term in the terminology or a general blanket statement. Yiddish. Okay,
Yeah.
the word Yiddish is very specific. So there's no way out of that one now.
Right. In Rutherford's book, Universal War Near, again, you can see on the cover the Jews there with the stereotypical dress and the hat and the little cane. He says, the great religious organizations participate in the political affairs of the nations and in the commercial and financial schemes to control and rule the people. He says they all operating for a selfish purpose, religion being the greatest and worst racket of all. Again, religion is a snare and a racket. The leading religious organization of the world engages in all manner of political and commercial schemes to control the wealth of the land. Why did God cause to be recorded in the Bible so much about religion and the Jews, and the dealing of the Jews with other people, and what then came to pass? So he's blaming the Jews for the problems that are going on in the world. Isn't that what Hitler did? Hitler was blaming the Jews for what was going on in Germany. We have now come to the end of the world, and it is God's command that a warning shall be given from his word of the great and final disaster that shall soon befall the world. And the things that came to pass upon Israel, he uses as striking examples, because Israel, under the leadership of her clergy, turned away from God's commandments and turned to religious practices. So he's saying they're the part of the cause of this, and so therefore we need to warn the world about the Jews. And that's why his anti-Semitic statements are here.
Now, once again, no more blanket statement with Jew. Okay. You can't separate, blanket with commercial, religious. Okay. He's using the term Yiddish, Israel. He's throwing every word out there to make clear who he's attacking and saying is behind all this.
All right. And so if we go back to Professor Garbe's book or Hez's book, where Robles trying to backpedal these statements, I think it's very difficult to get out from under this Jewish hate that he's putting in the literature. And the point that we're trying to focus on is the Jewish hate. Where did this anti-Semitism come from? Where did Rutherford's anti-Semitism come from? Stay tuned. We're getting there.
We're laying a groundwork of it so it can't be disputed.
In Rutherford's book, Prophecy, we have Satan's organization. And if you look there, you have the Catholic and the Jewish banker with his gold.
And looks like to the left, more of a politician.
Yeah.
So the politics, the Jews.
And the Catholics.
Arm in arm.
The economic, political, and religious working arm in arm. And he's already been stating how the Jews are controlling each of these. So in Garbe's book, he does hint towards some of this. It says, the Gestapo were well aware about this book. Freinwald was an expert on the Bible student issue. Freinwald's work, Die Zeugen Jehovah's, was published with the approval of the Catholic Church. In his work, this expert demonstrated that methods of defamation, quotations from Bible student publications, were taken out of context. Concepts changed, and obscure letters from some American Freemasons, according to which the Bible students supposedly were under Jewish control, used for reference. And so now the Nazis were also linking in the Bible students and the Jews. They had been attacking them. Now they're linking in the Freemason conspiracy and saying that they're all controlled together. What are the origins of that? We'll get to that soon. The Accusation and Garbage book here says there were connections between the Bible students and worldwide Judaism, which were disseminated for propaganda purposes and for the instructions of subordinate officials. According to Marbeck, Nazi leadership was certainly aware of, quote, the ultimately non-political character of this religious denomination. However, in view of contrary statements on the part of prominent Nazi politicians, Rosenberg, Hitler, and Himmler, on the other hand, had a change of mind, as well as an IBSA assessment in internal Gestapo memoranda. And so what they're saying is that they actually believed in the insinuations regarding supposed connections between the Bible students and worldwide Judaism. So again, they're linking the Bible students and the Jews into this worldwide conspiracy. The whole reason the Nazis went after the Jews was because they thought the Jews had some kind of worldwide conspiracy. And when very same day they went after the Jews, they went after the Bible students because they thought the Bible students were a part of that because they loved the Jews. We'll get into a little bit more about the background of that here in just a moment. In the Crusade Against Christianity book, and this was written by, again, the editor of the Golden Age in Germany, and it was a book that was only published in French, Polish, and German, never in English, so we had to have the book translated. There's some statements in there from the Nazi government that talks about this. So in number 236, it says, on Wednesday, October 13th, 1937, in the official section, we read the following. According to this law, the enemies of the people of goods in one state in connection with the law of confiscation of communist fortunes. And also according to the decree of the German police and the Ministry of Interior, the Harmonium seized the housing of the Bible students. And so the reason that the Bible students' literature and buildings were confiscated is because they thought they were part of this Jewish conspiracy.
As we keep showing and showing.
Yeah.
So we're making the point. It's not a random piece of literature out there. It's not random.
There's a
letters.
lot of documentation, a lot of evidence
consistent.
for that. Yeah. All right. So the October 7th, 1937, the president of the government, it says, one of the steadfast adherents, though cruelly tormented, of the sect of the Bible students' religious community, which thought they were rather special, but really harmless, which for unfathomable reasons is the purpose of sharing a terrible hatred of National Socialism. We don't know why they hated the Nazis. They should be taken as final ignominy, the instrument of worship, possibly her only, as in the poorest classes, the enthusiastic belief, his most faithful confessors. Such looting or real alleged opponents as such was practiced by the ancient despots to secure a conviction in Prussia, in the Prussia country, for the accuracy and correction and give it a legal appearance. So they had to try and give their attacks on the Bible students a legal appearance. In the Crusade Against Christianity, it says, even before the advent of Hitler came to power, the National Socialist fanatics, they make this claim. When we come to power, we will quickly get rid of you. The threat was made against the Bible students, despite their well-known in the political neutrality. Not taking part in any vote, they can in no way act against National Socialism. But in the beginning, the Nazis were hostile to the spread of Bible truth. That's not entirely true. It wasn't because of the things that they were teaching, it's the things that they thought they were teaching. They thought they were teaching pro-Zionist things, which they had already changed just a few months previous. Right? And so
the Catholics were not doing that. So therefore, their Bibles, and they weren't being attacked. So that doesn't mean, as a Jehovah's Witnesses say, Hitler was in the Catholics, they were all in cahoots with each other. No, once again, the reason Hitler did not go after the Catholics was because they were not preaching what Rutherford was a few months prior, of pro-Zionism, that they were so against, that Hitler was so against.
And so the Prussian Ministry of the Interior has a statement about this group again, about the Jehovah's Witnesses. It says, the dangerous conducted said association against the current government had been further strengthened by the fact that for some time, former communists and Marxists have been admitted to their ranks. All right, so they're trying to grasp at straws, trying to bring them into this communist conspiracy, right? Or this Jewish communist conspiracy, hoping to find a shelter that will allow them to fight the government, the current government. Association of Bible Students, therefore, and their organizations shall, within the purely political communism and is currently can be accommodated within it, the most diverse of elements, hostile to the state, including communists who belong to the highly active organized groups. So to combat communist activities and for the maintenance of order and security, the movement is dissolved. So again, because they were the Nazis, they were being dissolved because the Nazis thought they were being a part of the communist Jewish conspiracy. Not only because they refused to Heil Hitler.
Not at all, because they refused Heil Hitler. Not at all, until later as an excuse.
In Hez's book, there's a hypothesis. It says those who suffered even more than Jehovah's Witnesses were the Jews. This was only one judgment for them. The final solution meant the extermination of Jews for racial reasons. Despite explicit knowledge of these circumstances, the Jehovah's Witness book, Let God Be True, stated about the Jews. Many of their sufferings they inflicted upon themselves by their profit-seeking and rebellious conduct. And this sentence was after the Holocaust. It is then far too little when this sentence is silently deleted in the second edition of the book. This is far too little for me. And so here the historiography of the Jehovah's Witnesses does great wrong to those who were imprisoned with them in the concentration camps. This should be openly stated 50 years afterwards and admit one's guilt. This was done by my own Protestant church of necessity in the form of the Stuttgart Declaration of Guilt. And so the other churches could admit their guilt in what happened in what they said about the Jews and did to the Jews in Nazi Germany. The Jehovah's Witnesses have covered it up.
Well, they changed it. They changed the story, so it doesn't affect anymore.
So at jw.org, there's an article that asks the question, why did the Holocaust happen? Why didn't God stop it? And it has what it says is some common misconceptions about God and the Holocaust. So we'll play a little clip of that. Then we'll compare it to some previous things that Watchtower has said.
Myth. The Holocaust was God's punishment of the Jews. Fact. God did allow Jerusalem to be destroyed by the Romans in the 1st century. Since then, however, God does not single out any ethnic group for special favor or for punishment. In God's view, there is no difference between Jews and Gentiles.
So here's the two versions of Let God Be True that the book was talking about. And you'll see the first version of the book says, much of their suffering has been brought upon themselves by their commercial rebellious course of action. They will ever be a target of assault by Satan and his agents until Armageddon cleanses the earth of all opposers of Messiah Christ. So in other words, Watchtower is saying what happened to the Jews in the Holocaust is their own fault. It's because of their rebellious course of action. I find that reprehensible. I find this absolutely atrocious. In the second version of the book, that's removed. And so in the first book here, it says that it is a false hope that they must be regathered to Palestine and be converted en masse. And what they're saying is, no, they won't be converted. They're going to be destroyed because their rebellious course of action and what happened to them in Nazi Germany is their own fault. In the second version of the book, written after they became a nation, they had to backpedal it and say, well, they are in their nation now, but I just find this horrific, atrocious, very racist, very anti-Semitic.
Do they have it on their website where when they're talking about the Holocaust and why didn't God stop it? Do they include that addition in the statement they made in there?
Remember, they don't have books that far back on the website.
No, I know. I was
And one must wonder why, right? Yeah.
I was being facetious, and it proves the point why they don't have Rutherford's books on their website.
And so, if you remember, we had that discussion on the replacement theology when we looked at Vindication Volume 2. When Rutherford's doing this replacement theology, he's saying these anti-Semitic things. All right. So when we go to The Kingdom, his booklet, The Hope of the World, in 1931, he says, to enable the people to better understand God's reason for bringing this tribulation upon the nations, the history of the Jews was caused to be recorded in the Bible and is here mentioned. The Lord has declared that what happened to the Jews typified and foreshadowed what shall come upon Christendom, or the professed Christian nations of the world. The Jews were God's covenant people, but they became unfaithful to their covenant and turned to idolatrous practices. God sent his prophets who warned the Jews of his purpose to destroy their nation because of unfaithfulness. The leaders among the Jews ignored the warning, scoffed at the testimony of God's prophets, and then falsely prophesied to the people that no harm was coming to that nation. But shortly thereafter, the Jewish nation was swept out of existence. That history is being repeated.
Now, stop and think about that last statement. That history is being repeated. That's quite a judgment upon the Jewish people.
And note the date on this one. This was 1931.
Yep.
A couple years before Hitler comes to power. But think about a couple years previous, 2 years previous to this book, he wrote that book Life. And that book Life was how they were trying to witness to the Jews. And they didn't understand why the Jews didn't accept their message. And so they became very anti-Semitic and basically saying, well, we gave them the message and they didn't accept it. That's just like in the old days. Jesus gave them a message, they didn't accept it. And so they deserve to die. Pretty much, they need to be swept out of the way. They deserve to be destroyed. That's really the lesson here.
And once again, Rutherford kind of comparing himself with Jesus in giving them the final chance. You know, here's your final chance. Listen to me, and everything's going to, but they rejected his statements, just like they rejected Jesus's. It's again, this is the religion. It's based on a man.
And is based on hate.
And hate.
Right? Remember that discussion we had in the fourth trumpet blast. This message of hope wasn't a message of hope. It was a message of hate. And everything going forward was all just messages of hate, judgment, vindication, just vicious rhetoric. They had to be removed from the radio because of that. In the golden age of February 23rd, 1927, there's a lecture from Rutherford called The Righteous Government. And you could see hints of the anti-Semitism even here in the 1920s. Rutherford said, doubtless many of you have heard that the Jews shall again rule the earth. This has been much misunderstood. He's starting to change his opinion on it. Not every man who is a descendant of Abraham is a Jew by any means. Be it known once and for all that those profiteering, conscienceless, selfish men who call themselves Jews and who control the greater portion of the finances of the world and the business of the world will never be the rulers in this new earth. God would not risk such selfish men in such an important position. And so these rich, selfish, commercial Jews are going to be destroyed.
And he's not saying rich, selfish, commercial people. He's not categorizing every person who's like that. He's specifically singling out the Jewish people.
Yeah. It's reprehensible. Absolutely reprehensible. This anti-Semitic hatred. One more statement. And Jim Penton has a very intriguing statement in his Jehovah's Witnesses in the Third Reich. He says, and he's giving a reason why possibly Rutherford was anti-Semitic. What are the origins of this? Professor Penton says, it is quite probable that Rutherford would not have received new light in 1932 regarding the role of Jews in Jehovah's divine plan had it not been for the rising tide of anti-Semitism then engulfing the Western world. During the late 1920s and early 1930s, anti-Semitism was growing rapidly in the United States and Canada with the rise of a variety of movements, both political and religious. Once the Great Depression began in 1929, it became evident that Adolf Hitler and the violently racist and anti-Jewish Nazis might well come to power in Germany, which they in fact did on the 30th of January 1933. So it seems likely that Rutherford was anxious to disassociate Jehovah's Witnesses from the Jewish community in any way possible. However, that cannot excuse what the Watchtower president and his subordinates were to do shortly afterwards in the first year of the Third Reich. Professor Penton suggesting that this is the likely reason why Rutherford went down this anti-Semitic racist path. He built a whole religion out of this anti-Semitic racist rhetoric, out of this replacement theology, out of this anti-Semitic replacement theology.
And
his whole religion was based on it.
And where did he get these ideas from?
And so Penton doesn't appear to know. And so we're going to go now into where we think the origins of these ideas came from in Rutherford's mind. And we're going to give plenty of evidence for that. Once we found what we found, as we said, we had to go back and reread everything that we had seen before. Then certain phrases and certain things caught our eye, artwork even. And when we shared this with Professor Penton, he basically said it had never occurred to him to look or make the connections where we were looking. His exact words were that he was thunderstruck by what we found. What that was, where it came from, is where we're going next. Stay tuned.